the age of 77, President Thomas Jefferson did something unthinkable. In the cloistered privacy of Monticello, he took a holy book and cut it up to make his own.
For Jefferson, God wanted human beings to make up their own minds.
A dangerous time for the faithful. A secret search for truth.
Jefferson didn't want anybody to know that he had made this book.
His creation lives on, but just opening it up would destroy it.
I was afraid to touch it.
What we're going to be doing is taking it apart.
To save it, the Smithsonian National Museum of American History must take extraordinary measures.
And there's always a bit of concern that it comes back together.
Between its covers, this unassuming book tells many tales. In part by what is in it, in part by what is missing. From translations of the four Gospels in English, French, Latin, and Greek, Jefferson cut and pasted to create a chronology of Jesus' life, parables, and teachings.
He's like an archaeologist digging into the text.
Taking a blade to the pages of the Bible sounds like an act of sacrilege. But to Jefferson, it's an effort to pare the holy text down to the very essence of Jesus.
He thought that Jesus' message had been confused and corrupted. Because Jesus himself hadn't written it down.
But what is left behind reveals Jefferson's beliefs.
Anyone who wants to understand Jefferson's faith and his sense of spirituality has to use Jefferson's Bible as a primary source.
He gets 2 copies of an English translation, it's the King James, 2 copies of a Greek and Latin translation, and 2 copies of a French translation. And then very, very carefully, he sets to work.
He needed 2 copies of each version so he could work with the front and back of a page as he cut out over 1,000 Bible passages to construct a side-by-side comparison of the translations. He called it the life and morals of Jesus of Nazareth. Six years later, Jefferson died in debt. His worldly possessions were liquidated, leaving an empty Monticello stripped of art and furniture. So it's amazing that this volume still exists. It's traveled through the decades to find a permanent home at the National Museum of American History.
This, I think, is one of our great treasures. Just holding it, knowing this was not only a book that belonged to Thomas Jefferson, but actually an effort of his own, a creation of his own.
But the book is in trouble.
The pages are so brittle, the binding is so tight.
The paper is so fragile that without intervention, the book can never again be exhibited. Even if it is kept in a temperature-controlled environment, it will continue to degrade until it can't be opened at all. Curator Harry Rubenstein, together with book and paper conservator Janice Stagnito-Ellis, are going to make certain that doesn't happen. To transform the Jefferson Bible into a book that can again be shared with the public, the museum has launched a landmark project. Years of planning, endless fundraising, and recruiting an A-list team of specialists has brought us to this moment.
This is less than once in a career. This is maybe once in 10 careers. Most conservators don't have the privilege of working on an artifact like this.
The goal is to transform this brittle object back into a book. But they will also open a page into the past. Monticello. A brick and mortar glimpse into the mind of a genius. But who was Jefferson? Founding father, revolutionary, president. He was a man of his time, but it was a time he had a hand in creating.
You can't remove Jefferson from the sense of the revolution and how important that really is. They were remaking their society in a way that nobody had remade their society before. And Jefferson is at the core and the center of this.
For the great men behind the American Revolution, the Enlightenment was the horse they rode into battle.
It was this really heady time. Ever since Newton had discovered what seemed to be the definite laws of the planets, it seemed to some people that simply by using human reason and the scientific method, people could together arrive at these truths.
It's this notion that the individual can make a better world for themselves.
So given that belief, you examine everything by the light of reason. Is there a King of England? You question him. Is there a parliament making laws? You question them. Is there an established church? You question that. Is there a Bible? You read that again.
Jefferson questioned it all, including the way Jesus is portrayed in the Bible.
Throughout Jefferson's adult life, he really is struggling with this larger question of once you get rid of an official church and a king sanctioned supposedly by God, then you have to say, what is the new moral basis for a republic?
Before it became a bumper sticker, Jefferson was asking the question, what would Jesus do?
What he thought was superior about the philosophy of Jesus was in the phrase, love thy neighbor. It wasn't enough simply to act appropriately to your neighbor. You were supposed to have affection and benevolence. And then the second thing was maybe in the phrase, love your enemy.
That is an ethic, a moral approach to the world that would recognize the dignity of all human beings. But in Jefferson's day, this was a new way of thinking about the world.
But Jefferson's world was founded on a practice that denied the dignity of many human beings.
He understands the conflicts of slavery, the problems that slavery has for the nation. On the other hand, he is an owner of slaves in a very large plantation that supports the system.
He's so radical in so many ways, and that's the one area where he's really not. He really fails his own sense of being as forward-thinking and as advanced as he would like to be. And why that is, he was caught in it in many ways, certainly financially, emotionally, in lots of ways.
Both a champion of liberty and a slave owner. From the distance of 200 years, Jefferson confounds.
Thomas Jefferson is a complicated character, so complicated that many historians have suggested we can't know him, that he's impenetrable.
A part of the Virginia aristocracy, he fought for the common man. A brilliant communicator, but shy in crowds. Egalitarian, but self-indulged.
There's a lot of contradictions in Jefferson, and like everybody else, he changes over time.
"200 years later, we can try to get to know him through the objects he left behind.
Okay, so here it is.
Before they can stabilize and repair the book, Janice and her team need to figure out exactly what they are dealing with.
Trying to get a sense of how fragile it is.
Because the volume is fundamentally a scrapbook, there's a baffling array of materials to analyze.
There's adhesive to consider. There are inks to consider, not only the printing inks from the 6 different source books, but also the manuscript inks. He's got inks that he used to write the notations on the side, and there are the page numbers, and there's ruling lines, and those are all potentially different recipes of ink that we have to test separately.
The chemical composition of each of Jefferson's materials could limit the possible treatment options. Janice is about to become the world's foremost expert on these pages. She won't make a move to repair them until she completes an exhaustive survey.
So I have to be able to get my microscope to focus down there.
Do you have some recommendations of spots that you've identified yet?
You know, this is the curatorial decision, because
Right.
everything that we take...
Can't be put back.
Right. Right.
Preliminary tests revealed that the pages are too acidic for their own good. An alkaline bath could chemically stabilize them and make them less brittle. But first, Janice needs to make sure that all 10 different inks, 12 types of paper, and the adhesive will stand up to the treatment. The end goal, of course, is to preserve and share the Bible with the public. But in Jefferson's time, it was a private project, and for good reason.
Throughout his political life, Jefferson becomes criticized by his opponents, not only of being an atheist or a deist, but actually being anti-religious. And those attacks he takes very personally.
Sometimes we make the historical mistake of believing that the founding fathers had a kind of Christianity that was just like ours. But that's not really the case.
Many of the educated men of the time were not Christians, but deists.
They believed in the existence of God, but they didn't believe in the involvement of God in the day-to-day world.
Don't let the powdered wigs fool you. The founders weren't stuffy traditionalists about religion or much else, and Jefferson was out in front of the rest.
He described his own beliefs once as saying, "I am of a sect by myself," meaning he was the only one he knew in his religion that believed exactly what he believed.
Off the page with my right hand.
Fast forward nearly 2 centuries, and Smithsonian conservators Janice Stagnito-Ellis and Emily Rainwater are examining the doctrine of Jefferson's singular sect under a microscope.
I'm trying to take the smallest of all possible samples from stray ink that had splashed or sprayed from his quill.
They need only tiny ink samples to help determine the next conservation steps. The trick is to remove the ink without damaging the paper beneath.
Each sample is probably going to be somewhere around 20 microns. So this is 1/5 of a millimeter. It's very, very small.
20 microns is less than half the width of a human hair.
You ready? I'm ready. Okay, here we go. All right, I see some fibers coming. Okay. It's mostly paper. Down. That was not good because I think the ink may have flicked off. And what I have now is paper. Let's try another spot. Okay. Okay, so it is that tiny dot, which is towards the edge. Okay. Okay, here we go. It fell to the slide. You see it? Yep. Got it. All right, I'll leave my hands up And you can remove the slide. Got it.
The samples will be scrutinized to determine the exact composition of Jefferson's materials.
Right here.
Meanwhile, Janice's team logs more than 3,000 hours, noting 20,000 observations about the ink, paper, and sewing structure of the binding. It's an effort worthy of the book's creator.
One of the things I love about this book is how meticulously it is put together. There are no cut corners. There are no places where he went astray in his cuts. Everything is lined up with engineering-like precision. And that I just find amazing.
The care that he has taken, his own real views of these passages and what they meant and how he assembled them. You get a sense of the private individual that only a handful of people ever really got to know.
Jefferson was amazingly fastidious in almost every realm of his life. The range of record books that he kept over his entire life. He recorded the temperature twice a day for most of his adult life. One of the few things we know that he did on July 4, 1776, was record the temperature 2 times.
So here he's just cut out a couple of words. And rather than cutting out the whole line and then just removing the words that he wanted, he just removed the several words from this line and the several words for the next line. He didn't bother to cut out any more than he absolutely needed. I'm sure he folded his socks before he put them away.
Janice needs to know more about the book than just what it's made of. If she has to take it apart, she must first figure out how it was put together. But in a handmade world, no 2 books are exactly alike.
Paper making was a fantastically labor-intensive process. And so too, the setting of type, 1 letter at a time, none of this was mechanized. And then the 2 pressmen printing off 1 side of the sheet at a time and then letting the sheets dry, and then all the sheets had to be collated and then eventually bound together, another process that took many hours. Each individual book, if you added up all the hours, took, maybe 100 hours of human labor.
A label on the Bible's marbled end leaf identifies the bookbinder, Frederick Mayo.
He's considered one of the master American colonial bookbinders. Fred was a rather prolific advertiser and did not miss an opportunity to advertise his wares.
Could some idiosyncratic quirk of construction lie within the cover? Is the Jefferson Bible's binding so unique it shouldn't be touched? The Rare Book School at Thomas Jefferson's own University of Virginia has more of Mayo's work from the same era that could shed some light.
Let's look at these, since these are the most similar to what we have.
The book was bound by Mayo in 1820, the same time period as Jefferson's Bible.
This book has the same tooling along the edges.
Oh.
This little palm pattern all around the edges is identical. So chances are you get into a groove as a craftsman and you get into a routine, and we're hoping to find his routine.
The book has led a hard life, but it allows a glimpse of what the Jefferson Bible may look like on the inside.
So I'm trying to peek inside to see the sewing threads. Can you see them?
Yeah. Oh, there's the tacking of the end band.
Right, okay.
See that? It's still really bright red.
That's good to know. So this is pretty boldly colored.
Oh, yeah.
Ours, we couldn't tell what color it was.
Uh-huh.
This binding is sewn together just like Jefferson's book. The Jefferson Bible would have been just one of many books Mayo bound for Thomas Jefferson, who was a finicky customer.
He had a very European sensibility. He preferred European bindings immensely to American bindings, which he called spongy.
The book is tightly bound. If Jefferson were driving rather than reading, he'd have preferred a German suspension. But something's gotta give. When you open any book, it's either the pages or the binding. A tight binding means the pages must flex. But after almost 200 years, this fragile paper can't take the stress.
It has become very brittle in its old age. And the problem is magnified by the way the book has been bound.
Jefferson's firm opinions about binding weren't the musings of an amateur.
Jefferson owned 6,000 books, which meant that he had more books than many libraries in the world.
Books are indeed with me a necessity of life.
He often acquired them unbound and then sent them off to bookbinders to be bound. The first time that he lived anywhere where he had easy access to buying books was when he went to the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg.
For a middle-class family, a Bible would have been the most expensive item in the home after the bed. So it was no small investment for Jefferson to take 6 Bible translations and cut them up. And this wasn't even the first time. Before the life and morals of Jesus of Nazareth, and while living in the White House, President Jefferson created an earlier draft he called The Philosophy of Jesus.
The book itself, we believe, existed at the time of Jefferson's death, but has been lost ever since.
The second book was made right here in Monticello's cabinet room. Jefferson was engaged in a lifelong quest to improve, refine, and perfect.
There was a contemporary journalist named William Duane, and he told John Adams that Thomas Jefferson was the greatest rubber off of dust that Duane had ever met. Jefferson wanted to get rid of what he considered the dust, the useless part of it.
In the case of Jefferson's Bible, the dust he was rubbing off contained the supernatural elements. As a Jesuit priest as well as a rare book expert, Father Michael Suarez is uniquely qualified to interpret what Jefferson sought to explore.
Jefferson, as his life evolved, increasingly became uncomfortable with the stories of Jesus in the Gospels.
In addition to comparing translations, Jefferson sets out to remove the miracles and retain the morality.
He produces a Bible in which there are no supernatural elements, no references to Old Testament prophecy, no angels, no miracles, no resurrection.
Now, his motivation is really to get to the core teachings. And so he felt that those things that are miracles or can't be explained really are outside of the core teaching and had been added over the years by various misunderstood people.
Abstracting what is really his from the rubbish in which it is buried, easily distinguished by its luster from the dross of his biographers, and as separate from that as the diamond from the dunghill.
Jefferson strips away angels, miracles, and the resurrection itself in his search for the moral center of the text.
Now, an Orthodox Christian would read the Jefferson Bible and say, how very sad. How very sad to have a Jesus with no miracles. How very pathetic not to have the resurrection of Christ. But Jefferson thought that that kind of violation of natural law was an impossibility, and he thought that the resurrection of Jesus was an historical fable imposed upon the life story of Jesus.
There laid they Jesus, and rolled the great stone to the door of the sepulchre, and departed.
The book ends there.
For Jefferson, it's not an act of desecration, and it should not be understood as such. For Jefferson, it's a kind of act of enlightenment piety.
In the conservation lab, the intensive analysis is yielding results.
We discovered that 98% of the pages have physical damage that's being caused by the binding. Tear at the head of 39 recto.
To compensate for the bulk of the pasted passages, bookbinder Frederick Mayo wrapped stubs of paper around the spine side of the pages. Today, those added paper stubs are the culprit, causing every page to tear in the same place. The team will need to replace Mayo's stubs with their own thinner, gentler design. Another weak spot on each page was perpetrated by the acidic ink Jefferson used to draw ruling lines. Jefferson wouldn't be Jefferson, owner of 6,000 books, if his investigation of the Gospels was limited to English.
So there's Greek and Latin on one side and French and English on the other side. And he scored a nice line right to the center, and then that created a channel for the iron gall ink to sit. So you add a structural weakness in the paper beneath ink, which is acidic, and you get a big problem.
To stabilize these weaknesses and others, they need free access to the pages.
What we're going to be doing with the Bible is taking it apart. And there's always a bit of concern that it comes back together. We don't do this lightly, but on the other hand, we realize that our goal isn't just to hold these objects, store them away forever, and have them slowly decay without anybody enjoying them or appreciating their historical significance.
The first hurdle is removing the book's leather cover. But it's not just any cover. Above and beyond having belonged to Thomas Jefferson, it's straight-grain red Morocco made from goatskin using an 11th century Moorish recipe. It takes dozens of steps over many weeks to produce. No one makes leather like this anymore. It's literally irreplaceable.
Ordinarily, what a bookbinder would do is take the boards off and then take the spine off separately. But ordinarily, bookbinders don't have a piece of straight-grain red Morocco.
Janice has examined the leather under a microscope, and it appears fairly stable. So she's going to try to remove the entire cover, boards and spine, together in one piece.
The worst that could happen is that the covers would come off in pieces, front cover, back cover, spine, but I could guarantee that it wouldn't come off in one piece if I didn't try. So I gotta try it.
The Paper Conservation Laboratory at the National Museum of American History is on lockdown. Janice is about to attempt to remove the cover of the Jefferson Bible. Months of intensive preparation have led up to this moment. Now, success rests in Janice's skillful hands.
Usually when I have a task like this, I work straight through. Because as soon as you stand up from the table and walk away and then come back, you kind of lose your groove and you have to start all over again.
First, she applies a temporary facing to the outside of the book to give the leather a little extra support.
I know that it has some physical strength left to it, but I'm a chicken and I don't trust a 200-year-old piece of skin to keep itself intact.
With the book prepped, the moment has arrived. For a book conservator, removing the cover is like performing surgery, with one small exception. Janice isn't wearing gloves. because she needs to be able to feel exactly what she's doing. She gingerly separates the glue from the end papers that hold the cover in place. At last, the cover comes loose in one perfect piece. Janice has just completed the most stressful task of her career.
There definitely is that element of complete wonder and honor, but on a different level, you have to remember that you can't be paralyzed by what it is. You really have to somehow find the bravery to move with it, and that's hard.
A red Morocco binding was the luxury equivalent of a Louis Vuitton bag. The most expensive leather of the time is also the most durable. No lesser quality cover could have possibly endured this treatment. The text block looks naked without its cover, and soon it will be without a spine as well.
When do you think you're going to do that?
Doing it today. Hopefully by the end of the day it'll be in loose pieces. Do you want to scrape some off?
Nope. That's your job. Okay, I'll see you.
Okay.
Looks wonderful.
The first step is to remove Frederick Mayo's glue from the spine of the book.
It just softens it enough that I can scrape off those linings and the adhesive underneath.
All under the approving eye of the project mascot. Conservation is not restoration. It's not about gussying it up to make it look as good as new. The Jefferson Bible has a place in history.
The idea really is to keep as many original Jeffersonian elements as possible.
Janice removes the stitches that hold the book together.
There are 3 tie downs for the head and tail end bands.
She ties tiny threads to the fragments of silk end band. Incredibly, she plans to sew them back into place when she reassembles the book.
If we could reuse the originals, that's so much the better.
At last, the end bands fall away, and only a few threads hold the pages together.
We can actually open the book now.
Next, Janice needs to separate the pages without damaging the fragile paper. The first step is a matter of tradition.
The wise man always starts from the back of the book. That way, if you make any kind of an error, it's in the spot that's the least visible.
Her secret is using just the right amount of force.
You don't ever want to apply more pressure than the pages are able to take, or else you could tear them. Ready?
Throughout the conservation process, each individual page will live here in its own custom-made protective enclosure. A few pages in, Janice discovers something she didn't expect.
And there are 3 tiny fragments. 3.
Scraps of paper stuck in the binding.
How would these little bits of paper get in there? Because that would have happened
while he was making it, not later when it was bound.
Seems kind of unusual.
The working assumption is that Jefferson created the book using loose pieces of paper that were later bound.
If I was faced with the task of gluing hundreds of little pieces in very neat, orderly ways onto paper, I would have probably had flat paper in front of me and then done everything sort of flat in a controlled way on a flat surface.
But could these paper fragments suggest otherwise? Are they preserved because he was gluing into a blank book instead of flat paper? A letter to a friend indicates that he used a blank book for the Bible he created while president.
With a view to do this for my own satisfaction, I had sent to Philadelphia to get 2 Testaments Greek of the same edition and 2 English, with the design to cut out the morsels of morality and paste them on the leaves of a book.
So did Jefferson order a blank book and fill its pages?
Gosh, that would have been impossible to hold these books open, rule the lines with quill, and cut everything out and do everything so neatly.
Perhaps he had help.
At the end of Jefferson's life, there were 13 people besides himself living in the Monticello house.
And hundreds of people living on the plantation.
So it could have been any number of people.
The conservation team dutifully collects the text fragments. Anything hiding in this book is part of the historical record. Just a few pages later, another bizarre discovery. What appeared to be slivers of glass.
Sometimes they would use drying crystals if they were writing letters, and drying crystals were used to help to dry the inks more quickly. But these don't look sandy enough. These look more glass-like.
Was there an accident while he was creating the book, or later in its life?
There's another tiny shard right here.
We may never know, but closer examination reveals the shards are indeed made of glass. As the pages come loose, so do the stubs, and an unexpected clue. For the first time, a watermark is visible. P.A. Messier. This paper was made in a mill on the site of the New York Botanical Garden.
The screen upon which this paper was formed has the P.A. Messier watermark on it. It was made in 1817. And the mill burned down in 1822. So there's this great little window of when this paper was made, and that actually helps to date the Bible.
The watermark also closes the book on another question.
These stubs have a watermark. The Jefferson paper does not. So it was not a blank book, which is exactly what we had suspected when we mapped out the structure before we took anything apart. And this just is a nice, neat way of confirming it, thanks to the watermark.
At last, the final pages come apart.
So that's it for now.
The book is safely disbound.
That's it.
Thanks to months of preparation and long hours of precision work, not one piece was damaged in the process. But they are only halfway there.
Getting the gloves off.
One part of the initial conservation plan has changed. The aqueous solution Janice had hoped to use to bathe the pages has been foiled by an ingredient within the scrapbook.
When we did the analysis, there was actually starch adhesive in there, which means that had we done the aqueous treatment at the water combination that we thought we could do, that adhesive would have failed. And that's just not acceptable.
There are a baffling number of variables. To top it off, the team has more than one book to deal with. Amazingly, the museum also owns Jefferson's 2 English source Bibles, the books he cut up to make the life and morals of Jesus of Nazareth.
This one is just holding on by a thread.
It's already starting to break a little bit right here in these areas.
The source Bibles, they are a treasure in themselves because it really shows you he was meticulous about selecting just the tiniest areas where he wanted to use the words for the Jefferson Bible.
This one I've only supported on the front. I haven't trimmed it out yet, so there's a little bit that I'll trim out.
Without the discovery of the source Bibles, Jefferson's book may never have been found.
Cyrus Adler is a student at Johns Hopkins University, and in the 1880s, he has the opportunity to catalog a large collection in a private library of Judaica. Inside this library are 2 cut-up copies of the New Testament, in which various passages are clearly extracted from the pages. And in the inside cover is a description of Jefferson's project.
Adler launched a search for Jefferson's Bible, but for almost a decade, he was unsuccessful.
9 years later, he's now the librarian of the Smithsonian Institution, and he takes up the search again. And he gets in contact with the great-granddaughter of Thomas Jefferson, and she has just recently come into possession of the book. And he purchases the book from her for $400.
In 1904, Congress published 9,000 copies and distributed them to its members over the next half-century. That a Bible lacking the resurrection could be shared with an entire branch of government is a true testament to how the country has changed since Jefferson's time. For its first century and a half, Virginia's state law mandated its citizens worship only in the Anglican Church of England, and they were all taxed for the privilege.
In Virginia, if you believed something else, you were prohibited by law from meeting and worshiping. Preachers who were preaching either a Baptist faith or Presbyterian faith, or Quakers who traveled through and preached, those people could be arrested.
For Jefferson, the discrimination of dissenting believers was a spur to action.
That is a major impulse for Jefferson. That is that idea of dismantling that unholy alliance of church and state that was the antithesis of his vision of republicanism, or what we now call democracy.
You will be welcomed into his warm arms.
He believed very, very strongly that there were natural human rights. Human rights were innate and that everyone had them. And one of them was the freedom to believe what you wanted to believe.
It does me no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg.
For Jefferson, the fact that there are all sorts of groups just shows God wanted human beings to make up their own minds and did not want the government to step in and say, no, there's only one right way.
It's not about arguing that there is a correct path, but really allowing for those groups to establish their own religious freedom within this larger community.
In 1777, Jefferson drafted the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom.
Of all the things he did in his entire life, he really only wanted 3 achievements to be on his gravestone. He was the author of the Declaration of Independence, the founder of the University of Virginia, and author of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom.
Jefferson's statute became the basis for the First Amendment to the Constitution. With the pages released from their binding, the conservation team is able to work their magic on countless cracks, snags, and other weak spots. Each mend involves a curatorial decision. Any original damage is supported rather than fixed.
We don't want it to look like a 20th century object. We want it to look like what it is.
And what it is well worn. Jefferson reported reading a moral text before bed every night.
This was a piece that he was working with. It wasn't the kind of thing where it was a project that he finished, put aside.
Layering whisper-thin pieces of Japanese kozo paper, the team works their way through every page, making invisible mends.
We have completed all the page repair, so now we'll stack them in order and let them sit together under weights for about 2 weeks while they get used to each other again.
It's been nearly a year since the first surveys began. At last, they are ready to reassemble the book.
Hey, how are you?
Good, good. How's it going?
It's going well. We're ready to sew. But the challenge is, when the book was originally sewn, Frederick Mayo used a hammer to really compress. So the spine in the original is pretty narrow.
So if you get your sewing down to this level,
right,
you know it'll slide right back in.
That's right.
Sounds like a sort of difficult balance.
It's going to be a little difficult.
Right.
It's sort of like trying to fit into your wedding dress after you've had 2 kids. Seeing the finished product will be indescribably gratifying. It will be the beginning and the end of probably the most challenging and most rewarding project of my career. We've chosen a really thin thread because we can't add too much extra bulk here.
At last, these pages are being sewn together for the second time.
How's it looking? Sewn, preliminary linings. Came up to the right height, thank God. Yay. So I'm hoping it fits. Shall we try it?
Yes.
This is the final test.
Moment of truth.
Dun, dun, dun. Oh, that's nice.
Oh my gosh. It fits. Like our hands never touched it. The wedding dress fits.
They reattach the original silk end bands, glue the cover back on, and it's done.
It looks so beautiful that I want to cry. Should we open it?
Did you do the honors since you've been working with it for so long?
It works.
It works. It's a book. It opens beautiful.
It's smiling, just
it's
like
alive.
The life and morals of Jesus of Nazareth may not contain miracles, but the volume itself has been brought back to life.
Jefferson's family did not place it in a place where it would fall into 1 or 2 hands for quiet reflection. They gave it to the National Museum, with the understanding, I am sure, that it would be seen.
The process itself has given just me a better understanding of Jefferson the individual.
A handbook for American morality, a scholar's search for truth, a guide to the faith of a founder,
This is the New Testament he really believed to be true. That's his system of beliefs right there.
He's someone who never gave up his enormous curiosity about the world around him. He never stopped feeling optimistic about the future, about the perfectibility, really, of human life.
For Jefferson, reading this edited Bible was like sitting at the feet of a master in whom he could believe every word.